So something very annoying happened. I left, so I have my microphones, right? I have all of them, but I left the thing that plugs into my iPad at my dad's house, and he's out of town right now, so I can't use them. And my iPad audio will just like not work sometimes. That's why I use microphones all the time. So this might be a painful video to get through. This is my attempt at creating a video for AP World, quote, Unit 0. I like watching videos to learn, right? And so when there are very close to 0 videos on this Unit 0, besides Heimler's and a few other videos, I was like, that's a problem. So I'm gonna try to produce my own. Hopefully it will like go viral, you know, add a bunch of hashtags. But this is my video trying to explain to you essentially everything you need to know going into the class about what happened before the year 1200 BCE. No, CE. CE, sorry, that messed me up. I took notes mainly from my memory to try to like test my knowledge, but there are facts. I did look up things if I didn't know it. But this is AP World Unit 0. I'm going to preface this with something as like when it comes to dates. I don't know why we named it, like it went from BC, like before Christ, like AD, it went from that was the original, for like the timeline. I don't know why we switched it to BCE and CE if we're still going to use Christ's birth as the determinant of what the time's going to be. So I guess it's to make it less religion-based, but it's still using the time when Jesus was around. So I don't know, but we're going to start off with the agricultural revolution, which is the first real detrimental thing that happened in human history, and happened around 10,000 BCE. And this is when you went from period of having people that were just nomadic, and their whole purpose in life and their whole, like, their day-to-day was just going around trying to find food, find shelter, just trying to live and survive. And over a period of time, humans kind of discovered that you can plant things and then you can stay stationary and just like, instead of going to the plants, you can bring the plants to you and you can just like plant things. And this like really just shifted everything, because they're like, we don't have to just go around like, hunting anymore and like trying to harvest vegetables and fruits. We can stay put and have one specific spot for us to stay. So this led to, since everyone is just like staying in the same vicinity, not moving around all the time, this led to people being not bored, but they're like, okay, now that we don't have to just gather and hunt all day, we can do other things. So this brought the rise of different jobs like merchants and carpenters and engineers and cooks, just like people that want to do different things besides just hunt and gather, right? So this is the first main like turning point, if you will, in human history that went from making us nomadic people to just like stationary people. And this led to the like people staying in places and like certain areas and creating communities, led to the first recorded ancient civilizations, which I'm going to go into now. First ancient civilization that I'm going to be talking about is the Indus River Valley civilization. Now, most of the ancient civilizations that were very prominent and very successful were around rivers, because you got to have a fresh source of water to have a community. You know, water is the foundation for everything. So you can't live without water, you can't grow things without water, you know. So most of them were around main rivers. This one was around the Indus River, which is somewhat on the border of nowadays Pakistan and India. So this civilization was mainly from 3,300 BCE to 1,300 BCE. So it's like around 2,000 year period that they were very successful. And the only things archaeologists were able to really gather about them is based off of architecture and fossils, because they had a written language, but archaeologists and historians were not able to decipher this language that they had. And so most of the stuff we know about them is based off of how their temples were set up, how their just buildings were set up, how their villages were, how like textiles looked, things like that. But they seemed very successful and very peaceful. Very few, if any, weapons were found in this village. Like I said, we really only know how they lived architecturally, mainly. That was like the biggest thing that we figured out how they lived. And it seemed as though they did not have many temples, palaces, or elaborate royal tombs, which means they lived not conservatively, but they just weren't like materialistic. And again, it's not like they lived conservatively, but they didn't try to be robust and have all these super nice things. They lived functionally, basically. They created things that were functional. Like they had this thing called the Great Bath. That was basically a giant bath for everyone to clean themselves off in. But it was more functional for sanitation and standardization rather than having the prettiest or the biggest or the most robust structures. It was shown they also traded with many civilizations. We can see stamps of theirs as far as in Mesopotamia, which is another one I'll talk about. But main cities in this civilization that I think are in the AP World curriculum is Harappa. And then there's the Mohenjo-Daro. I'm going to write it on the screen. Near the south. So these are like the two cities that are mentioned in AP World. And those just belong to the Indus River Valley civilization. I'm going to need to speed this up a little bit. Next is ancient Mesopotamia, which in my opinion is the most televised and known ancient of the civilizations, but besides the Egyptians. But this is in modern day Iraq, and it was along the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, because again, they have to be along rivers, because how else are you going to get fresh water? They had a writing we were able to decipher, unlike the Indus River Valley. It was called cuneiform. They are most notably famous for having the first signs of written law, which was the Code of Hammurabi. So having a set of moral foundations for governing and just having a law system. They created taxes because they had a very successful code of law, right? They were able to set rules upon and create discipline with. And this led to them having very specific moral and legal standards within their ancient civilization. There were signs of early mathematics. They had, unlike the Indus River Valley civilization, they had ginormous temples they called ziggurats that were very big and performative. I don't know if that's the right word, but robust and show-offy, right? They were credited with creating the wheel. That's a very big one. So the rivers that they lived on were, and still are, I think, very unpredictable when it comes to flooding. And so you never really knew when the Tigris and the Euphrates were going to flood, which led to some problems. But also, it made for them to create this nice, elaborate irrigation systems for them to farm agriculture and things like that. So where at the Indus River Valley, they could have a more simplistic irrigation system because the Indus River was very calm and very predictable when it comes to flooding. Here, it was unpredictable, so they had to have some good irrigation systems so the whole place wouldn't flood. One con of this place is that Mesopotamia lacked physical barriers. There was no mountain ranges, there was no seas, barricading them or surrounding them. So they were very vulnerable to invasion and being conquered. So they were conquered multiple times. They're controlled by many different groups, like the Babylonians, the Akkadians, the Assyrians. And so there was many periods of time where they were under rule of people that weren't their own, because they were just kind of in this open land that was very easily accessible by foreigners. Next, we have the Egyptians, or the ancient Nile River civilization, because they were located along the Nile in modern-day Egypt, were very if not completely reliant on the Nile River, which luckily for them, the Nile is very predictable. Unlike Mesopotamia, they were able to predict when it was going to flood, when it was just very calm and easygoing and predictable for the most part. Unlike Mesopotamia, Egypt was surrounded by deserts to the east and west, the Sahara, the Mediterranean to the north, which made for a highly stable and unified society in early history. So they weren't prone to being conquered by other places because they're kind of isolated. There's a desert. No one wants to go through the Sahara just to conquer a civilization, or crossing the Mediterranean. That's hard, especially in ancient times, right? So they weren't really conquered as much as Mesopotamia was, if at all. Egypt was a centralized state with pharaohs who were considered political leaders and living gods. So this is one of the first times in history that you see political figures and leaders that are also religious leaders. So that created for more disciplined society, because if you have your religious leader as your political leader, you're more gonna follow the rules and the directions because it's your belief, it's your faith, right? And cooperation in society, leading to the ability for these civilizations to do things like create the pyramids. People that didn't like the rulers and didn't believe the rulers and have full faith in the rulers would not make these giant pyramids, right? Their writing was called hieroglyphics, and they are also credited with developing a 350-day calendar. Speaking of the religion, they were polytheistic and believed heavily in afterlife. So polytheistic, if you haven't watched my other videos, means they believed in many gods for different things. They believed heavily in afterlife, which made them mummify bodies of loved ones and people that have passed, and made it easier, very easy, for archaeologists to discover these bodies and learn more about the culture in later, the 20th century CE. So 50, 60 years ago in our time, or no, more probably 80 years ago, but made it much easier to understand more of their culture because you could see their mummified bodies still. Patriarchal society, however, women held higher status compared to many other contemporary civilizations. They could own land, manage business, and even become pharaohs. And I think lastly is the Yellow River civilization, which is located along the Huanghe in China, which stretches from east central China to the east, to the East China Sea. And this river was also very unpredictable in terms of flooding, and when it did flood, it deposited nutrient-dense silt, which helped irrigation. So when it flooded, it created nutrient-dense silt, which was good for agriculture and irrigation. However, it did destroy the entire city. So they named it the River of Sorrows. So that's kind of nice. Like Egypt, they were also very protected from invaders because they had the Gobi Desert in the north. Again, no one likes traveling through deserts to conquer civilizations. They had the Himalayan mountains to the southwest. They had the Pacific to the east. So they were not only protected from invaders, but they were also culturally isolated from the rest of the world for a long time. These things called dynasties, which is just long periods where families are rolling over. They had these very early on, like the Jia and the Shang dynasty. They also notably created the Mandate of Heaven, which was a belief that I feel like were also perceived in later civilizations. And this is just the idea of one of if a dynasty ruler fails, it is because the gods disapproved of them or something. And if they failed or their dynasty fell, it was because the gods disapproved of them somehow. So it created this divine intervention idea, which is seen in Greek mythology kind of too. And they also, like the Egyptians, believed heavily in honoring the deceased and kind of even after they died to honor them. The reason I went so in depth with that is because it is a very important foundation for how every other civilization acted after this. It set up a groundwork for different societal structures and things like that. And it's just a very important part of the curriculum going into AP World. So again, I think that will be the most in-depth I go into for topics, but next is the classical era of these different places. So we don't really need to know individually, I think, each of the places, what they were like in the classical era. You just need to know big concepts overall. And so one of the most notable things in this period is the rise of massive and modern day religions. So, well, there were also expansion of empires, of course. So you got your empires getting bigger and bigger, and less wanting to focus on building their society and more focusing on wanting to conquer other people's societies. It's a common theme we see throughout history. But some of the biggest religions that were formed at this time were Hinduism, which originated in India and was very prevalent in India. And they believed in the caste system and reincarnation, and it was a polytheistic religion, so they believed in many gods. And it was just kind of like details of the religion, but the idea is that you live life, right? And then after you die, you will reincarnate as something either higher or lower based on how you acted and how your life was in that previous life. And they set up something called the caste system, which was very successfully used in also Indian government, because it set up this hierarchy of how you can class individuals and how this can set up jobs and living situations and things like that. So it like laid this framework and this moral and religious justification for the hierarchy of people in India. Hinduism arose Buddhism, which I'm not going to say is the exact opposite of Hinduism, but it is this idea that life is suffering. So if you want to escape suffering, you have to basically stop liking everything materialistic, almost everything. You have to let go of that, because if you let go of joy and love and those things, you will also let go of suffering. And it's like the idea of reaching the state of nirvana. It was very popular amongst lower class people in India during this time, because you don't like being in the lowest class of the caste system. That's not very fun. So if you can reach this state of nirvana that in Hinduism only the people at the very top of the pyramid can usually reach, it's good. So this was very quickly expanded because a lot of people like the idea of it. In China, Confucianism was the religion of choice mainly, and this one also was very heavily used for governing and the societal structure of China, because Confucianism is this, again, I don't really know the details of the religion that much, but it created these ideas of you just need of societal order and discipline, and you need to have respect for elders, for your superiors, for your father, for your master, So it was, again, justified. It made laws and societal structures very justifiable because you're justifying in religion. And it created a very disciplined and obedient society in China for a long time. The civil service exam, which was in China, and it's the kind of idea of equality of opportunity in nowadays America, where anyone can take this exam. It's basically testing your knowledge on Confucianism, and if you can score highly, you can have a high class job in society. So it really did create a very educated and very disciplined and respectful society, especially amongst the superiors. Taoism, which is also in China, which again was kind of the polar opposite of Confucianism, whereas Confucianism is very materialistic and very discipline oriented. Taoism is kind of disconnecting from all government and all artificial things and reconnecting with nature and animals and the earth. The two monotheistic religions, there are three, the most prevalent these days, at least in the West. Judaism, which is one of the first religions that prompted the idea of the one supreme God versus many other gods. This was very popular in Israel and the Middle East. And then this birthed Christianity. So there's a very common trend of having these prevalent religions that were very superior, birthing other religions that then become either superior or still very widespread. So Christianity, which is now the most popular religion in the world, or the most practiced, it has a very heavy foundation and influence from Judaism, with the idea of the supreme God, the one supreme God. But the difference between this and Judaism was that this taught the teachings of Jesus, and it was also more favored amongst the lower class because it had different beliefs that helped the lower class than Judaism. Lastly, we have Islam, which was the last biggest religion to come into play through the Prophet Muhammad, and laid the groundwork for many laws. So this is one of the things. So Islam also created many laws. So all these religions were justified and were the moral groundwork for most societal rules and laws. And Islam was one of the only ones that laid the groundwork for many Middle Eastern civilizations laws, called Sharia law. And most of Sharia law is still used today in Middle Eastern or Muslim countries. The last notable thing from the classical era, again, this was kind of a broad thing of what you needed to know, like the bare minimum of what you needed to know for AP World Unit 0, is the Silk Road. I'm sure you're familiar with this, you've heard of it before, but it was a trade hub across Asia that aided to a lot of trade between empires, and it was one of the biggest trade routes that helped the spread of religion, goods, and diseases. So that was very detrimental to society as a whole of all the empires. And there was also the Indian Ocean trade and the Trans-Saharan trade. Now, I'm not going to say any of them were more widely used than the others, but the Indian Ocean trade was just in the Indian Ocean between the surrounding empires, like surrounding the Indian Ocean. And then the Trans-Saharan trade was just the countries around the Sahara and going through the Sahara. Lastly, we have post-classical. Some notable things from this time period was the rise of Islam. So quickly after the creation of Islam, it spread widely and quickly, creating massive areas of cultural and economic exchange known as Dar al-Islam. So it was the most famous and the most popular in the Middle East, in Middle Eastern Asia. So, lastly, again, I'm probably missing some stuff. I'll probably make a follow-up video. We'll see. So for China, following the collapse of the Han Dynasty, the Sui and Tang Dynasty, they reunified China. And because during classical and ancient civilizations, China was always in this period of warring states. So they were all the different states were all just kind of going at each other the whole time. Which led into the golden age of the Song Dynasty, which is where Unit 1 starts for China. So I feel as though I may have missed a few topics. I feel like I nailed the ancient civilizations, but post-classical got a little lazy at the end there, I feel like. So yeah, thank you. This is my attempt at trying to go viral. So thank you for watching. I'm going to try to make this video shorter than what it's looking like it's going to be currently. It's going to be a long one currently, I think. But bye, thank you. School is very soon, so you'll be getting more videos out of me.